Hello, my name is Reverend Dae-jong. I'm part of the clergy team at Muddy Waters Zen Temple in Roanoke, Michigan, and I'm the organizer of the Belmont Zen Center in St. Clairsville, Ohio. I'd like to begin with 3 short readings. The first one is from the Korean Buddhist master Chinul from the preface to Homnon Choryo, a commentary on the Avatamsaka or Flower Garland Sutra, which was published in the year 1207. What the world-honored one said with his mouth constitutes the teaching of the scholastic schools. What the patriarchs transmitted with their minds is Zen. What the Buddha said and what the patriarchs transmitted certainly cannot be contradictory. Why do students of both scholastic and Zen schools not explore what is at the core of these teachings, but instead, complacent only in their own training, vainly involve themselves with debates and waste their time? The second reading is by Rabbi Rami Shapiro from an article entitled Buddhism Meets Hasidism, included in the summer 2016 issue of Tricycle magazine. The relationship of religion to truth is like that of a menu to a meal. The menu describes the meal as best it can. It points to something beyond itself. As long as we use the menu as a guide, we do it honor. When we mistake the menu for the meal, we do it and ourselves a grave injustice. The final reading is from Yang Wan Li, a 12th century Chinese poet, translated by Jonathan Chavez. Don't read books. Don't chant poems. When you read books, your eyeballs wither away, leaving the bare sockets. When you chant poems, your heart leaks out slowly with each word. People say reading books is enjoyable. People say chanting poems is fun. But if your lips constantly make a sound like an insect chirping in autumn, you will only turn into a haggard old man. And even if you don't turn into a haggard old man, it's annoying for others to have to hear you. It's so much better to close your eyes, sit in your study, lower the curtains, sweep the floor, burn incense. It's beautiful to listen to the wind, listen to the rain, take a walk when you feel energetic, and when you're tired, go to sleep. I want to start this talk by explaining my name. For anyone who isn't familiar, it's common in the Buddhist tradition for a person to be given a new name, a Dharma name, when they formally become a Buddhist, and for them to get another new name if they're ordained as a priest or a monastic. In the Son tradition of Korea, these names are in classical Sino-Korean, very traditional Korean when it was still written in Chinese characters. Typically at Muddy Water Temple, the clergy will get together and talk about the person, deciding on a name that fits them. It's also the practice that groups of people will have the first part of their name in common as a generation or a sort of a Dharma family. When I took the precepts with Hedo Sunim, when I formally became a Buddhist, he gave me the name Dae-jong. Now, Dae means great. It's the Sino-Korean equivalent of the Sanskrit word Maha, as in Mahayana, the great vehicle. Jong means treasury or storehouse, as in the Sino-Korean name for the Bodhisattva Kshitigarbha, Ji-jang Bosal, meaning earth, storehouse, enlightenment being. In a Buddhist context, Jang is usually understood to mean a storehouse of Dharma, of Buddhist knowledge, or in other words, a library. Hedo Sunim thought this would be a good name for me at the time because I knew so much about the Buddha Dharma, being an academic and widely read. So, I think that this was meant to be a compliment. Boy, he sure does know a lot. But actually, that wasn't the case at all. My name was intended to be a reminder by Sunim about what really matters. It was what I like to call constructively passive-aggressive. Every time someone says my name, or I tell someone my name, it's Hedo Sunim reminding me, you may know a lot, but remember that's not the goal. That's not where enlightenment comes from. This reminder is very important to me. I find it very valuable. And in fact, I should have gotten a new name when I was ordained as a Dharma teacher. I should have become Bup something or other, like most of the other clergy at Muddy Water. But I asked Hedo Sunim and Jongme Kunsunim, the patriarch of our parish, if I could keep Dae-jong as my name, and they were kind enough to let me. In the San understanding, knowing a lot is not a path to liberation. Salvation via bibliography is not possible in this tradition. Reading a lot of books won't get you enlightened. The traditional founder of Chan in China, the Indian monk Bodhidharma, is purported to have written about the path he taught, a special transmission outside the scriptures, not founded upon words and letters. The Chan, San, Zen, Tian school is replete with stories about proud scholars realizing they'd wasted their time and effort getting rid of their books and dedicating themselves thereafter to practice. One of my favorites of these stories is the one about Deshan Xuanjian, which is told in the Blue Cliff record collection of koans and cited by Eihidogen, the founder of Japanese Soto Zen, in his Shobogenzo. So the story goes something like this. Deshan was a famous scholar, an expert on the Diamond Sutra and a writer of commentaries about it. He heard about Chan teachers claiming to transmit the true Dharma, so he decided to go on a pilgrimage to challenge their teachings and prove the superiority of his scholarship. And on the way to the temple of Zen master Chongshin, he stopped for refreshment at the roadside stall of an old lady who was selling rice cakes. She asked what was in his big backpack and was completely unimpressed when he said it was full of books about the Diamond Sutra. The old lady told him she would only sell him rice cakes if he could answer her question. I was told that the Diamond Sutra says, the past mind is ungraspable, the present mind is ungraspable, the future mind is ungraspable. With which mind will you satisfy your hunger with these cakes? He could only stand there dumbfounded, unable to respond, and so he went away hungry. He said to himself, a painted rice cake does not satisfy hunger. So he went to study with a Chan teacher and burned all of his commentaries. Within the Chan family, but especially within the Japanese Zen tradition that's its main representative in the West, study is commonly downplayed and denigrated, in some cases to the point of being anti-intellectual. Don't study. Don't read books. Just sit. Study is bad. Reading will mess you up. Just sit in the posture of a Buddha and inherent wisdom will naturally emerge. Some Zen teachers also point frequently to the sixth Chinese patriarch Huineng, whom tradition records as being illiterate, as an example of how study is unnecessary or even detrimental to enlightenment. The Korean San tradition has never taken it quite so far, but you can certainly find quotes from some famous San lineage teachers who are quite derogatory of study. At the risk of being controversial, I'm going to say I don't buy it. I think study is essential. I think study is necessary but not sufficient for Western convert Buddhists in particular, and here's why. Imagine that you were born into a Buddhist family in a predominantly Buddhist culture and country, like, say, Thailand, or one in which Buddhism is historically very important and still highly visible in the culture, like South Korea. You would have grown up in an environment suffused with the Buddha Dharma. You would have been surrounded by temples. You would have heard the stories and celebrated the holidays commemorating Buddhist history from childhood. You would have seen and interacted with Buddhist clergy regularly your whole life. The terminology of Buddhism would just be everyday familiar language. You would have been raised in a Buddhist context to develop a Buddhist worldview, and in the process you would have absorbed a lot of basic knowledge without the need for formal study. It would have just happened naturally and organically. But for someone growing up almost anywhere in America, in a family that isn't Buddhist, that person would have to go out of their way to seek out knowledge of the Buddha Dharma. That natural absorption isn't going to happen. For them to get it, they need a more formal and contrived process. In other words, they need to study. And for those of us who come to the Buddhist tradition as adults, we have a lot of catching up to do. I mentioned language a minute ago. Just think about the jargon of Buddhism, the technical terms. Without some formal study, even the most basic terminology will be obscure and confusing. To a person with that background, being told to practice without any sort of foundational knowledge would be like being told to go into a kitchen and cook a meal without a cookbook or any training in cooking. you're probably just going to make a big mess for nothing. You're probably going to produce a dish that's both unpalatable and unhealthy. You might think you're accomplishing something, but really you'll have just wasted your time and perhaps done more harm than good, or maybe you just get so frustrated that you abandon the attempt altogether. On the other hand, you can't get any sustenance from just reading cookbooks. Eventually you have to eat. This would be like studying all the time, reading all the books, but never putting any of that knowledge into practice. You may know someone, collects cookbooks, watches cooking shows all the time, but rarely ever cooks. And when they do, it's one of the same dozen recipes they've made for years. They acquire a lot of knowledge, but it doesn't have any benefit in their own lives or those of people around them. It fills their minds, but it doesn't feed their bodies. Studying sutras and reading books is not a substitute for engaging with the mind through practice and with the world through enacting the Dharma in our daily lives. While there are forms of the Buddhist tradition that place a great deal of value on study and scholarship, the Chan, Son, Zen, Dian family never really has. Rabbi Shapiro wrote, "As long as we use the menu as a guide, we do it honor. When we mistake the menu for the meal, we do it and ourselves a grave injustice." And that's true. But on the other hand, without the menu, you don't know what dishes are available, so you have no idea what to ask for, no way to get the food that will sustain you. To use another analogy that might be more meaningful to you, practice without study is like going on a trip by just getting in your car and driving aimlessly without a plan. No guidebook, no map, no geographic knowledge at all. You're liable to just get yourself lost, driving around in circles, but never really getting any closer to a worthwhile destination. By contrast, study without practice is like looking at maps and reading guidebooks for hours, but never leaving your house. It might be fun, a fun preoccupation. It might fill your head with a lot of information, but it's not the same as the lived experience of visiting a place, meeting the people, eating the food, and so on. If you look at those traditional stories I mentioned earlier, like the tale of scholar Deshan Xuanjian, you get the sense that these were people who'd constructed a complex but illusory image of a self from all that study. They'd built an identity for themselves around how much they knew, and they saw accumulating knowledge and showing it off to other people as its own end, as opposed to a means to an end. The problem was not the study per se, but the complete lack of any sort of balance in their lives, which were all intellect but without embodied experience, all theory, no practice. To paraphrase the Bible, it's not study but the love of study, not knowledge but the attachment to knowledge that creates the problem. Just as the body is a tool for practice, the intellect should be too. I don't think it's productive to deny ourselves the use of that tool. We just have to be careful with it. As with any tool, just pounding things is not the purpose of a hammer. Just cutting things is not the purpose of a saw. Building something useful and beautiful is the real purpose of those tools. The intellect can be a tool that can help us break through to wisdom and enlightenment, or it can be a detrimental force that destroys the path to liberation. It's all in how we use the tool. So read a book, but when you do, remember, at best, it's a map. And what matters is the experience of the journey and its destination. Remember that the knowledge you study is a cookbook, and that study is a waste of time and effort unless it leads to a fulfilling meal. You have to put everything into practice. Sangbo Shipshio. May you and all beings manifest enlightenment.